everyone, I am back. I know you haven't seen me for a while, but we've been finalizing the move. The move is done. The new house is great. We're still organizing a bunch of things in my office. My new filming location is about 98% done. I just got to hang up some more of my nerd crap and things like that. But this filming location is a lot better than the room I've been using for the last year, so I'm very happy about that. But you won't be seeing a whole heck of a lot of me in here for the next month or so because baby's on the way. The due date is July 8th, and right now my wife is just a bomb waiting to go off. And we're kind of, we've been told that, could be a week after the due date, could be an hour from now. Who knows? We don't know. So we're just kind of sitting and waiting, and we're bunkering down inside the new home and staying close to the hospital, just in case. But since I'm going to be dealing with becoming a father and getting used to having the baby around and taking care of my child for the next few weeks, that's going to be taking up a lot of my time. So you won't be seeing many videos from me until about August. Once we've kind of gotten used to everything, we've got a routine down, and she's all taken care of and everything. But this video is going to be quite long because of that. I'm going to have a lot of stuff in here with some AEW talk, some WWE talk, and my WWF versus WCW/NWA dream card that I've been planning on and working on since before WrestleMania. I'm finally going to get that out to you guys. But it's the last you're going to see of me for a while, again, at least until August. But before I jump into all the wrestling stuff, a couple updates on the Godzilla Kaiju my book project. Couple small updates. Volume 1 of Godzilla the Monster Fight Record is 100% done. It is done. The final proofreads have been made. I don't want to look at it anymore. I don't want to make any more changes to it. It is what it is, and the version that you see when it gets released is how it is now. I'm not going to make any more changes to it. So if there are any mistakes, I'll fix it on a second edition. But for right now, this is how it's going to be. Volume 1 is completely done. And Volume 2, I want to do one more run-through proofread of it before I can say that one is done. And again, I'm shooting for that August 27th release date. We'll see if that sticks. At the very least, I want to get both books out before November, which is the release of the new Godzilla film in Japan. So get the book out before the new film release and get the book out before the new film is released and renders my fight record obsolete. Because if Godzilla has any more monster fights in that upcoming movie, the record's going to be out of date. But it covers a point in time, and that's my defense of it. It'll cover a specific period from 1954 to 2021, Godzilla vs. Kong. So be on the lookout for that, because August rolls around, I'm going to be promoting the holy heck out of it best I can. And you'll be seeing that. It'll be popping up on Amazon. That's where it'll be, and I've got it set up for digital, paperback, and hardcover. So again, be on the lookout for that. August 27th is the date to look forward to, and hopefully I can meet that date and get it ready. But also, Netflix saw the release of Skull Island, an animated show about Skull Island, King Kong's home, in the Monsterverse. And it's supposed to take place within the continuity of the Monsterverse. I'll give my basic feelings on it right now. It's a quick watch. It's 8 episodes, less than half an hour long each, so it's very quick. I breeze through it pretty quickly. I thought it was okay. It wasn't fantastic. It wasn't great. The first 6 episodes are kind of a slog because there's not a whole lot of King Kong in it. And I just spent the entire show going, this focusing on this family drama and all this stuff going on with all the other characters. And I'm just sitting there thinking, it's like, when does Kong factor into any of this? And we don't get a whole lot of Kong until the last 2 episodes, where the show becomes a King Kong show out of nowhere, and I just look at that and I go, yeah, this is what the show should have been the whole time. So it does get there. If you're looking for King Kong being King Kong, the last 2 episodes has you covered, but it's a bit of a rough ride getting there, especially since the characters themselves are kind of weirdly written, where a lot of the dialogue sounds like it's trying to be hip with the youth, and it's a little obnoxious and, again, a little too modern for my taste. And I couldn't get a sense for where this takes place in the Monsterverse. I was a little confused by that. Not that the Monsterverse has the tightest continuity in the world, but it is supposed to take place within that continuity, and I just couldn't figure out where exactly it fits into the timeline. And honestly, I think the only character I really liked was Dog, because it's a big monster dog that doesn't talk. So it's like, yeah, Dog's pretty cool. I like that little guy. But other than that, it was kind of like I wasn't really feeling the characters. But the show, again, it's a pretty easy breezy viewing, and I'm not upset with it by any stretch of the imagination. This isn't another Masters of the Universe Revelations or anything as bad as that, but it is, I feel like it could have been better, and had the first 6 episodes been more in line with the last 2 episodes, I think I would have liked it a lot more. Because, you see a show called Skull Island, you expect a lot more Kong. Not that I need King Kong on screen every 20 seconds or anything like that, but it would have been nice if the story was about him, and it really wasn't, again, until the last 2 episodes, and that just feels like a disappointment. It almost feels like King Kong was slapped onto this thing at the last second, because it's like, oh shoot, we should put some more Kong into this King Kong show, but regardless, it's mildly entertaining viewing. It's not terrible by any means, and if you're looking for King Kong, like I said, the last 2 episodes pretty much have you covered, but the first 6 are a bit of a slog to get through, so that's my take on it. So I think that's enough of the monster talk. Let's jump into the wrestling. And jumping into the WWE part of the discussion, we got Money in the Bank coming up this weekend, and it's really strange. Like, I didn't even realize this until Money in the Bank came up, but I was like, they held a pay-per-view in Puerto Rico, which I guess is it's a United States territory, but it's still kind of considered like a foreign, overseas area. They had a pay-per-view in Saudi Arabia, now they're having one in London, England, and it's like, man, they're just... Are all the pay-per-views for the rest of 2023 going to be out of the country? I don't know. It's quite interesting. But there's a lot of stuff going on for that show, and I'm kind of interested in seeing where a lot of this stuff goes. But my overall feelings on WWE programming at the moment is that they've got some big things going that work for me, namely the Bloodline stuff tends to be really, really good. The Usos turning on Roman was great and handled really well. And typically there's some stuff in there that I enjoy show to show, and that's for both Raw and SmackDown. But the overall presentation, there's a lot of filler material. There's a lot of repetitive stuff. There's a lot of stuff that just doesn't work for me. And I typically don't watch the shows live anymore. I'll watch it the next day on DVR so I can fast forward over commercials and things like that. And it's amazing to me, Raw and SmackDown, it's amazing to me how quickly I can get through an entire episode of Raw when you skip the commercials, the highlight packages, and the stuff that's just not working. I could watch a 3-hour Raw in maybe a little over an hour. And SmackDown, kind of the same thing. It's, a 2-hour show. I can probably watch it in about an hour when you cut out commercials and highlight packages. So there's a lot of filler material in WWE. You probably don't realize it until you watch it the way I do, which is DVR, watch it the next day, and just fast forward over the stuff that you don't want to watch. There's a lot of stuff on there that is easily skippable. I'm not a fan of how they handled the women's title situation, where they put the Raw title on SmackDown and the SmackDown title on Raw, and instead of addressing it, they just kind of rebranded the titles to look identical to the new men's titles, and it just felt silly. And I've made it clear I'm not a huge fan of their redesign of the big gold belt for Seth Rollins' belt, so to have a women's title with that same design doesn't appeal to me either. And it just I was also getting sick of these new title presentations. It was like a weekly segment. It felt like it was getting a little repetitive in that regard. I'm also not a big fan of Seth Rollins' current run as champion doing... it's like, he's going to be the opposite of Roman. He's going to be a fighting champion that has matches every week. And it's like, yeah, but that makes it less special. And this is already a consolation prize to Roman's belt. That's made clear through many of the things they've done, including Paul Heyman still walking around carrying Roman's 2 old, red and blue belts. So it's like, okay, so that just reinforces the image that Seth's belt is just a consolation prize because they didn't know how to get out of the Roman Reigns situation that they booked themselves into. So not a fan of that championship, not a fan of this run. Nothing against Seth. It's just I felt like the creation of this second belt was completely pointless and meaningless, and it's turned out to be a pointless and meaningless belt that I'm just not overly interested in at all whatsoever. And it just looks like the secondary belt next to whatever Roman's doing, because Roman never got beat for a belt, and it just feels like a consolation prize. They could have had Cody win at Mania, and use that as an avenue to split the belts up. I know they wanted to get Roman to 1,000 days, but maybe it would have made more sense if they... Again, maybe if you didn't book yourself into this situation, you could have found a way out of it. I don't know. Again, it's easy to play armchair quarterback. But it's like with the women's titles. Like, why'd you switch the titles and not even address like how you were gonna fix it? And it feels like just one day they were like, you know what, screw it, let's just redesign the belts and we'll just do it that way. And they didn't really put a whole heck of a lot of thought into it. They just said, God damn, pal, we'll just do it this way. And that's pretty much what happened. So WWE programming, there's some flaws. There's some big flaws. But I think Cody tends to be pretty entertaining because he's Cody. LA Knight has come on as like a superstar. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and says that LA Knight is the modern day DDP, where he's like an older guy, but he's managed to become one of the best parts of the show despite that. And I'm happy to see LA Knight doing as well as he's doing, because I was a fan of his back when he was in Impact. And people said I was crazy when I said he was one of the better guys in the business. Because that was when he was, I'm Eli Drake, dummy, yeah. And I love that whole bit. I'm like, this guy is gold. And this is, people are sleeping on this guy. I think at the time I called him a diamond in the rough. And now here he is, he's in WWE and he's mad over. And I'm like, yeah, you give the guy the mic, he'll get himself over. And the name is that, normally when they give these guys a new name, it doesn't work. LA Knight is actually kind of a cool name, and it's the same number of syllables as Eli Drake, so it works with his bit completely. And it's nice that he's doing well. If anything came out of that stupid feud with Bray Wyatt, it's that it gave LA Knight more exposure. And he came out of that, despite everything, he came out of that a bigger star. And I think leaving him out of the WrestleMania card, even though it was in California and Hollywood and LA and all that stuff, was a huge oversight on their part. And I think he's getting over enough to a point where it's like, okay, you can't ignore it anymore. You've got to do something substantial with him. He can't just be the jobber to the stars. Again, I'm not necessarily saying put the world title on the guy, but I am saying maybe give him a big babyface run and do something with him. He deserves to be doing something. Because right now it's like they're giving him table scraps and he's just taking whatever he's giving and making gold out of it. So it's like when somebody like that comes around, you got to do something substantial with him, because he's a guy that we talk about it all the time. People who naturally get over when they don't necessarily have the big machine behind him or the major push behind him. He's a guy that naturally got over, and I kind of look, an equivalent of that in in AEW. They keep talking about how Sammy Guevara is one of the pillars and Jungle Boy is one of the pillars, and I look at them and I go, Ricky Starks is so much better than those two. It's ridiculous, and Ricky Starks ideally should be the guy in their spot. Because they're constantly getting chances and constantly getting pushes. And I look at Ricky Starks, they're like, he's a better talker than all of them. Like, why is he not getting the push, I would say just as good a worker, if not better. And he's a much better talker, so Ricky Starks. And LA Knight, it's like, look, name me another guy in WWE right now that's as good as he is on the mic. I'll wait. Maybe Cody. It's a different kind of talker, but, most people in WWE these days are not known for their speaking abilities, which is so funny because WWE was always the entertainment, version of pro wrestling, so you would think they would be loaded with great talkers, and at one time they were. At various points in their history they were, but now it's like everybody just sounds so stilted and insincere in their delivery, but LA Knight sounds amazing, which is why he's over as he is. And I think they should absolutely do something with him, because he's consistently one of the more entertaining parts of the show. And like I said, keeping with the things I'm enjoying about WWE, the Usos Roman Reigns stuff is great. I think that's all great. I think probably the breakdown of the Bloodline would have meant more if Roman had lost the title, and there would be more of a reason for there to be a breakdown in the Bloodline. And granted, the Usos lost the tag titles. That kind of was like the genesis of all of this, so it kind of works. But I'm thinking back to like WCW, NWO days when Hogan lost the title to Sting, which was poorly executed. But at the end of the day, he came out of that without the title. And that kind of facilitated the split in the NWO between the Wolfpack and Hollywood, which on paper was a great idea, poorly executed in hindsight, but it felt like Hogan losing the belt was like the genesis of like a civil war within the NWO, and I feel like Roman dropping the belt would have made this Bloodline civil war a little bit more impactful. But that's just my my opinion on the matter. It's still working great. The segment where the Usos finally turned on him was very, very well handled, and I love Paul Heyman's involvement, where he's kind of the poison pill that caused the Usos to finally decide, it's like, okay, we can't, look, we love you, your family, but we can't with this guy. He's a snake in the grass. And I think that whole segment came off beautifully and made for what I feel is the most exciting match at the upcoming pay-per-view. And very well crafted, very well done. You see stuff like that, and you know, like, okay, WWE could be top to bottom amazing if they weren't filled with so much filler and so much repetition. And there have been points in WWE's history where they were much worse than they are now. Like, WWE programming Raw and SmackDown, it's at least palatable. And they're doing some things I enjoy. It's just that I feel like it could be better. Because, goddamn, I remember the brand split, or the guest host era of Raw. I remember how bad that was, and certain runs in Cena's run at the top that made the program just unwatchable for me. But right now, it's at least palatable. I just feel like they could be doing things a little bit better, but that's just my take. But enough of talking about WWE. Let's preview Money in the Bank. I have the card pulled up right here, and let's get over this. Okay, we've got Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler defending the women's tag team titles against Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. I guess it makes sense to do this match given that Liv and Raquel didn't lose the titles and injury forced them to drop it. So it makes sense to do this match. I don't really care about the women's tag titles or Ronda Rousey or pretty much anybody involved in this. I think Raquel has potential to be a name and a bigger star in the women's division, but other than that, I don't really care too much about this. I would imagine Ronda and Shayna would retain here, but that's my guess. Then we have Gunther defending the Intercontinental title against Matt Riddle. I would expect Gunther to retain here because I think they're going to have him break Honky Tonk Man's record and finally crown a new longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time, which makes sense because Roman needs some new opponents because after he beat Cody at Mania, I was like, who's left? And maybe if they can do Gunther versus Roman down the road, that might work. Even though, well, no, because Gunther's on a different show, so it's like maybe not. I don't know. But regardless, I anticipate Gunther's going to retain here. Then we've got Cody Rhodes versus Dominic Mysterio. This could be a fun old school match because Dominic is so hateable and Cody's kind of an old school babyface. So I think this match could be a nice breath of fresh air for Cody and could be a fun match. I would anticipate Cody would go over, obviously, but this could be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that one. Then we've got Seth freaking Rollins defending the World Heavyweight Championship against Finn Balor. I don't care at all. I just don't care. And that's not a reflection of either guy. That's not a reflection of the talents. It's just, I don't care about this championship. I'm sure the match will be fine. Like, they'll go out there and they'll have their good, well-worked, well-constructed match, but this championship, I don't care. And this whole situation, I just don't care. It's a title that shouldn't exist, and I just don't care about it. It's kind of like AJ and Seth at the last pay-per-view, where it's like, yeah, the match was pretty good, but I still don't care about that championship because it's just, no matter what they do, it's just living in the shadow of whatever Roman Reigns is doing. And that was poorly conceived, poorly constructed, and it's, no matter what they do, it's going to look like a secondary title compared to Roman because that's how they've basically constructed it. So that's my take. And then we have the two Money in the Bank ladder matches. First, the women's match. We've got Zelina Vega, Becky Lynch, Zoe Starks, Bayley, Io Sky, and Trish Stratus. Trish, who has been doing great lately. I love this new run that she's been doing. She's been... she got off to a bit of a rocky start with a couple of awkward promos, but right now I think she's kind of settled into this legend that feels she deserves more bit that she's doing, and I think she's doing really well. Who wins this? God, I don't know. Honestly, if it were up to me, I'd probably give it to Trish. But I'd probably give it to her and let Trish and Becky feud over the briefcase. But I think they're probably going to give it to either Io Sky or Zelina just to try it on a kind of a newer one and try and elevate somebody else. And Zelina did really well in that match in Puerto Rico against Rhea Ripley, so they probably might want to give her another chance. So I'm thinking either Zelina or Io Sky, but if it were up to me, I would give it to Trish because she's just doing so well right now. But that's just me. And then we have the Money in the Bank ladder match for the men. Ricochet, Shinsuke Nakamura, Santos Escobar, Butch, Damian Priest, L.A. Knight, yeah, and Logan Paul, who just got inserted into the thing randomly without having to win a qualifying match. And some people are upset about Logan Paul's involvement. Some people don't like him and think that it's disrespectful to include Logan Paul and give him these big pushes when he's not around all the time. And that's certainly like an old school logic that I understand. And in a perfect world, LA Knight would be the winner of this match. I feel like if Logan Paul was not involved in this, I'd say LA Knight unquestionably should win this match. He's the most over guy in the match. And he should absolutely win the briefcase. If it were up to me, he'd get it. But Logan Paul, I think they want to do Logan Paul versus Seth Rollins too. Electric Boogaloo with the title on the line, and I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route. Now, my take on Logan Paul, and I know a lot of people have talked about this online, made videos about it, made tweets about it, and all that other stuff. My take on Logan Paul, I hate him as a person. I think he's insufferable. I think he's obnoxious. I don't see the appeal in him. I don't know how he became like an online sensation before going to WWE. I don't like the guy. He grates on my nerves like nobody's business. That said, it makes him a great heel. Like, he's so naturally good at this. Like, and I hate that he's good at this. And that's like, he's such a great source of heat. And initially when they tried to run with him as kind of a babyface, I was like, no, this guy should be a heel. And he works so much better as a heel. And like I said, he is such a gifted athlete, but even outside of that, like, his selling and his facial expressions are better than 90% of the guys who are there every week. And that's just the nature of the beast. And this is going to be a weird comparison and a long walk for a short glass of water, but bear with me. I've heard stories about behind the scenes of Star Trek Voyager when Jerry Ryan was brought on as 7 of 9. And she kind of became like the icon of that show, even though she didn't show up until a few seasons into the run of that show. And I know that like Kate Mulgrew wasn't happy about her inclusion because she was trying to like get away from like scantily clad, sexy, sex appeal, and that's how women are prevented in Star Trek. And she was upset that one of the other female cast members got dropped from the show. I forget the character's name and the actress's name, but she was upset that she got dropped from the show, and they kind of went in this new direction with 7 of 9, which kind of livened things up. And there was talk that like Jerry Ryan was having a relationship with one of the writers, and that's why 7 of 9 got so many like spotlight stories, because she was having an affair with one of the writers or whatever. And there was a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes that caused a lot of bad feelings and a lack of cohesion behind the scenes among the actors. I don't know all of the details. I've just heard broad strokes about what was going on. And it's like, look, I understand like losing an actor under these circumstances and making a cast change like this and going in a new direction with a new character that kind of came out of the blue a few seasons into the run of the show, and doing all of that stuff. I understand how that can breed resentment. I understand how people could not like that, and it seems unfair. All of that said, Star Trek Voyager got a lot better when 7 of 9 got there. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. Like, the show got significantly better when 7 of 9 was there. Voyager had a bunch of issues and problems. Had a lot of good things, too. It was, Voyager, I don't hate Voyager by any stretch of the imagination, but the show did get better when 7 of 9 got there. So you can bring up all the gripes and how it's unfair. It's like, yeah, but she did make the show better. I'm sorry. Just shrug your shoulders. And I'm speaking as a viewer. And I look at this Logan Paul situation, it's like, yeah, it's not fair that he gets to come in and potentially win a briefcase and get a pay-per-view spotlight when a bunch of other guys are busting their asses trying to get those spots. But he's better in the role. Like, he's just really good in the role. I don't know, like, I know it seems unfair, but it also seems like a really good decision because he is so naturally hateable that it just seems like perfect to put him in this type of match. And I wouldn't be surprised if he won this match just to do the rematch with Seth. Now, to me, it's going to be either him or LA Knight. Anybody else, and I like Shinsuke, I like Santos, I like Damian Priest. Ricochet, he's fine. No, like, he was better as Prince Puma. That's my take on that matter. But it's got to be either LA Knight or Logan Paul. Those are the two that should get it, because I think those are the ones you can create the most interesting situations with. Because Ricochet, Again, amazing athlete, but I don't think he has the character or the persona to really carry a main event level in the WWE. Again, Lucha Underground, he was great as Prince Puma, and they made him like the Lucha Captain America. Like, that character was great. But if you have to rely on him for his mic skills, that's not going to go very well, I don't think. And I don't think he's that guy. Shinsuke, they've kind of, I don't want to say they've dropped the ball with him, but it's just kind of, yeah, he's still a big name, but it's like, I don't see him as being a guy that could potentially win this. And Butch feels like they're putting him in there to do a favor for somebody. I mean, I like Pete Dunne, but it's his inclusion is a little weird. And maybe he's in it just because he can do a lot of the ladder spots. I don't know. But yeah, if we're up to me, LA Knight would probably win this, but I wouldn't be surprised if Logan Paul won this either. So that's my take on that. And finally on this card, we have what I feel is the most interesting match on the card. The Bloodline, Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa taking on former teammates the Usos, Jimmy and Jay, in the Bloodline Civil War tag match. A match that has all the storyline implications of being a potential tag team main event that I think would work great as a main event. And is by far the most interesting match heading into the show, and the main reason I'm checking out this pay-per-view. It's like, all right, they've got me. I want to see this match. It's the best storyline in WWE right now, and they're making it work, and I really want to see how this match plays out and who wins, and, like, is Roman going to suffer a loss to the Usos? Because it would make sense for the Usos to win here, because they're the tag team, and Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa, they're more stablemates and cohorts. Like, the Usos are the tag team, so they would have a clear advantage here. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm very excited for that match in particular, and it's good enough to make me want to check out this show. So I might not be able to watch it live, but I'm definitely going to check out that match for sure, because I want to see how it all plays out. Because, like I said, it's the best storyline in WWE right now. So there are issues with WWE programming, but overall they've got enough to keep me entertained, and it's surprisingly making for solid viewing every week. And I give them a ton of credit for that, and hopefully Money in the Bank continues that trend. And now let's move on to discussion about AEW, because there's been a lot of things going on with them lately, with the debut of Collision, the return of CM Punk, the start of the Owen Hart tournaments, both men and women, the lead into the Wembley show in August, and Forbidden Door, and oh my god, they've got so many balls up in the air right now that it's like, it's almost hard to keep track with it all. It's almost like they're too ambitious to try and, like, this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing, and they're, you know, MJF and Adam Cole are going to be in a blind tag team tournament or something like that. It's just, they've got a lot of stuff going on right now, and it just feels crazy. It's, like I said, it's almost too hard to keep up with all of it, but we've had 2 episodes of Collision, and my overall impressions of the show is that I think it's overall a better presentation than Dynamite. It feels more like grounded, real, but more like a grounded, kind of hard-nosed style of wrestling rather than a lot of the flippy stuff that you would see on Dynamite. So it's kind of like getting away from that a little bit. And I like the Saturday Night's Main Event style promo to kick off the second episode. So there's a lot of presentation things I like. The set looks really nice. And I think Punk, you know, automatically adds a lot of excitement to the show. Although I would not have him wrestle every week, because that'll take away from it and make him less special. I've said this a million times in a million different ways with a million different people. It's like, I get that you want Collision to be the Punk show, but he shouldn't be wrestling every week. Have him involved in stories and angles every week, but he shouldn't be wrestling every week. Because that makes it less special. Less is more. Less is always more. That's why Roman is a better champion than Seth Rollins right now. Because Roman doesn't show up every week, and it feels more special when he does show up. That's just how it is. It's why Hollywood Hogan worked so well in '97, because he wasn't there every week, and he didn't wrestle all the time. He barely defended the title. So when he did, it felt like a big deal, like the 100th Nitro and Starrcade 97, it felt like a big deal. We can talk about how good those matches were, but the reason those matches yielded a lot of financial success and, you know, big ratings, big pay-per-view buy rates or whatever, was because Hogan didn't defend the belt all the time. And Hogan didn't wrestle every week, and it's okay to go back to that. And that's kind of one of the problems with AEW programming in general, where it's just every week is just loaded wall-to-wall, match after match after match after match, high action, high-octane action over and over and over again. And now when you've got 3 shows of that, which is Dynamite, Rampage, which I guess they're keeping, I don't know why, they don't really need it, and Collision, it becomes a lot. And when you load a show with nothing but action, 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 and long matches and long matches, and I talked about it with WWE, that 6-man tag that, they had a 6-man tag that went 3 segments, and I was like, but why though? Like, and I don't even remember who was in the match. It was just on SmackDown, and it just went on forever, and I'm like, does the match really need to be this long? And AEW does that every week, it seems, where it's just matches that don't need to be long, go long, and it's just wall-to-wall wrestling all show long. It's like, you've got to have angles and promos, and not that they don't have those things, but I think back to the Attitude Era, the show was at its most exciting when you had things like the Rock and Mankind This Is Your Life segment, or the reveal of the Greater Power, and things like that. Things that you could build an entire episode around, and not have the guys risk getting hurt every week when they wrestle every week, and just let them have character builders, let them continue their stories, and then let the matches be the payoffs to those stories. But they just fill everything with action on top of action on top of action. It just gets exhausting after a while, and 5 hours of programming a week is only going to exacerbate that, especially when you have 5 hours of programming and then a 4-5 hour pay-per-view if you count the pre-show. On top of that, it's just exhausting by the end of it. It's just too much, and they need to scale it back, and give things time to breathe. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Impact Wrestling, but I made a comment a couple videos ago, and I stand by it, that if Impact had the budget and the roster of either WWE or AEW, they'd probably be the best show of the bunch. As is, it just looks like a high-end indie, which is basically what it is, but the pacing of the show seems a lot better than WWE or AEW, which just seem to drag, and it's like, man, can we get those people writing Impact right now in charge of AEW or WWE? It would probably be a more palatable show overall, but that's my take. Yeah, it's not that AEW programming is bad. It's just that they kind of get in their own way with some of their ideas, and the constant reliance on action. And it's like, no, you can slow it down, have stories and angles. And when they do, it's great. Like when Callis turned on Omega, that got me, and that was great. And that was more exciting and more engaging than a 30-minute match, for a belt, one of their 8 million titles that nobody cares about. Stuff like that is what sticks with people. And the matches should be the payoffs to those stories, not like a constant crutch to kind of trick people into being excited. Because that doesn't work. We've seen it over and over again. That doesn't work. And I look into these first 2 weeks of Collision, I'm still waiting for like a big angle or a big story with Punk, because right now he's just having matches. And yeah, he's in the Owen Hart tournament. Yeah, he advanced in the tournament at Forbidden Door, but I'm still waiting for, like, what's the big story with him? It's like, is he going to work with the Elite? And I've said it on Twitter, I'll say it here. If the Elite don't want to work with Punk, they are absolute fools, because this is an instantly made money feud, because Chicago, Punk was the huge babyface. Then they go to Canada, Punk is the huge heel, and the Elite got cheered. And if the Elite had actually shown up in Chicago, they would have gotten booed too. So it's like you've almost created like a Brett Shawn dynamic where, certain places one's going to get cheered over the other, and that can make things really exciting if you do an extended program between all the parties involved. And if I was one of the parties involved, I would have called like a week after the brawl out and just been like, look, let's make some money off this because people are talking right now. Let's make some money. And that's how my brain works. Like, look, I have worked with people that I absolutely cannot stand. I've never gotten into a fist fight in a locker room with anybody, but I've worked with people that I absolutely cannot stand. But you got to work with them to make everything work and keep the work going. And that's how it's got to be sometimes. It's called being a grown-up. That's how you got to do things. And you might not like it, but I look at this situation, it's like, look, the Wembley main event should be CM Punk and FTR versus the Elite. That's your main event, that's your match, and that's your big stadium match that I think everybody would enjoy. And if the Elite is kind of roadblocking that for whatever reason, they're fools. They are absolute fools, and they're leaving money on the table. That's my take on the matter. But yeah, Collision, I'm still waiting for like Punk's big angle or story, because right now it's just it's like 97 Saturday Night's main event at this point, which was a fun show, but it was just matches for the most part and low level angles for the lower card guys. And that's kind of what it feels like. And again, it's nice to have Andrade. Andrade's actually fitting in better now on Collision than he ever did in any previous thing he did in AEW. It's great to have Miro back, and all that stuff is fun, but it's like, okay, but where's it all going? Where's it all leading to? And again, I'm waiting for kind of a big angle or something, and it hasn't happened yet. So, but we'll see. They've still got time. I don't think they've screwed the pooch by any means. It's just kind of like, I'm a little impatient, because right now it's just all wrestling, and well, I guess the second episode had a few more promos and things like that, but and anyway, let's get into Forbidden Door, their latest pay-per-view effort, and something that I really, really want to talk about because I have a lot to say about it. And so let's dive into what was done at Forbidden Door. I did watch the show. I didn't watch it the night of. I watched it on Monday. And I have some thoughts. Overall, I thought the show was pretty good. I actually liked it more than last year's. Everyone raved about last year's show, and I was kind of meh on it. But I do think this show fell into some of the traps that AEW tends to fall into, where it's just match after match after match after match. Every match is trying to be the best match on the show, and when you do that, it just gets a little exhausting after a while. And my comment is, and the thing I always say, it's like, can we just get a Hacksaw Jim Duggan match out there? You know what I mean? And not literally saying, let's just bring out 70-year-old Hacksaw Jim Duggan and throw him out there in a match. Can we get a match like that, where it's just a guy going out there for a popcorn match and popping the crowd and just having some fun for a few minutes to kind of let us slow down after a very action-heavy match? A lot of the pacing is very, very off. It's okay to have filler matches. It's okay. Not every match needs to be a Supremo killer, action-packed roller coaster spectacle. And I think that mindset of everybody trying to get the highest star rating match on the show is just overkill. It really is just overkill. And I also feel like Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega probably should have closed the pay-per-view, because after that match it felt like nothing else could follow it. And I have some thoughts on the two matches that came after it, but for the most part, I thought the show was pretty good, and some of the matches got around like being full-on work rate technical spectacles and tried to be a little different from the norm. So it wasn't the worst example of AEW doing that, but it was definitely there. And again, shows like that just get a little exhausting after a while. So it's like, I wish they would have, like, would an intermission kill you? If you're going to do, to me, if your pay-per-view is 4 hours long, you should have an intermission. That's just, even if it's just 10 minutes, something like that to kind of break it up, give us a time to relax, do it. Baseball games have the 7th inning stretch for a reason. I'm just saying, like, it gets exhausting after a while. But let's start with the pre-show. We had the 8-man tag team match of the Mogul Embassy taking on Chaos and El Desperado. Match was okay. It was a typical spot festy multi-person match that you expect to see. Right people won. I like Brian Cage and I like Swerve Strickland. I've come around on Swerve. I wasn't the biggest fan of his when they brought him on board, but I've kind of come around on him. But I wish they'd give him something more substantial to do. But that team should have won, and they did. Then we had the women's Owen Hart tournament match between Athena and Billie Starkz. A better match than I expected. Athena's been really good every time I've seen her, and it's kind of a shame that she's stuck on ROH, because it's like she's probably better than most of the women on the current AEW roster and even some of the WWE roster, and she's kind of tucked away on Ring of Honor for some reason. But the match was pretty good, and Athena got the win, obviously, needed to happen. Then we had El Phantasmo versus Stu Grayson. Next. Then we had the 6-man tag trios match. LIJ taking on the United Empire. Again, another kind of action-heavy multi-person tag match. It was fine for what it was. LIJ got the win, and it was what it was. And these were all pre-show matches, not a lot riding on them, except for maybe the tournament match, but overall, it was just a pre-show loaded with action. I remember, and I'm going to use an Attitude Era example, and I'm going to use a TNA example, honestly. Back in the Attitude Era, when you had Sunday Night Heat as kind of a lead-in show, the unofficial pre-show for the pay-per-views, they used to do angles to kind of build anticipation for the pay-per-view, like... I think it was WrestleMania 15, which isn't my favorite WrestleMania by any stretch, but they did an angle where, like, Big Show was waiting outside the building to attack Stone Cold Steve Austin as he arrived into the arena. And that was kind of an angle that ran throughout the show, the pre-show. I'm like, oh my God, is Austin walking into a trap? What's going to happen? And it kind of built anticipation for the upcoming pay-per-view. It's like, oh my God, the whole main event and Austin's run to get the title back could be ruined before the show even starts. And doing stuff like that would be fun for a pre-show. And to use a TNA example, they were doing the King of the Mountain match at Slammiversary 05, and Jarrett was supposed to be in the match. And they did an angle on the pre-show where Jarrett attacked a fan and got ejected from the building, and Raven got put into the match in his place. And I remember at the time, I said something to the effect of, I think the pre-show was better than the pay-per-view because that angle was legit awesome, and it kind of threw the pay-per-view, it made the pay-per-view more exciting because like, well, we just lost like one of the top contenders for the main event who everybody thought was probably going to win the thing. And now Raven's going to be put there in his place. It's like, what's going to happen next? Tune into the pay-per-view. And, you know, not a lot of people reference things that TNA did right. That was something they did that actually made the pay-per-view more exciting. And again, I remember watching it, and I made the comment, you know, on the message boards. There was no Twitter back then, but I made the comments on the message boards that the pre-show was better than the pay-per-view itself because of that angle they did. And, you know, it'd be cool to do something like that, again, instead of just loading it up with matches that nobody's going to remember by the time the pay-per-view starts. I understand, like, doing pre-show matches kind of give people give them their reps and give them their time to, like, get better and do things like that, but as is, it was just kind of like a bunch of pointless matches that didn't really leave much of an impact, except maybe for the Athena-Billy Starks match, which had some importance to it because of the tournament, and Athena's, like, been a pretty good performer lately, so there's that. So, the main card, we opened up with MJF versus Hiromu Takahashi. Hiroshi Tanahashi, for the AEW World Championship. Now, I watched Tanahashi work on Collision, and he looked like he was working a step slower, and I was like, he seems a little off to me. And sure enough, it turns out he was working hurt. And so this match was a little bit more theatrical to kind of work around the fact that Tanahashi was working hurt. And I thought it worked great. I thought this was a great heel-face dynamic with MJF doing what MJF does to make all of his matches mean something. And this was an overall very strong opener to the show. And I thought it worked. Very entertaining match. Again, great heel-face dynamic. MJF is one of the best in the business at being a heel. And the match worked out great, and he won by cheating because that's what he should be doing, and ended up being pretty good. So this one gets a thumbs up for me. One of the better matches on the show. The next match was the Owen Hart tournament match for the men. Kicking off this tournament, CM Punk defeating Satoshi Kojima, which Punk referenced a shoot interview he did 20 years ago during the match, which involved Kojima, which is pretty... for those of you in the know, it's pretty funny. But the match itself also very, very good because it wasn't the most technically sound match in the world, but the Canadian crowd hated Punk so much that he was just able to have fun with it and be a sports entertainer and just kind of run with the crowd and kind of heel it up a little bit and have fun with it, which is what you should do if the crowd turns on you. I've seen so many people, like Randy Orton is the type of guy that, like, when he doesn't get the reaction he wants, he kind of gets upset, and it shows. And it's like, dude, go with what the crowd's doing. Just react. Just listen to them, react to it, and just have fun with it. Like Rock did at WrestleMania 18. And to his credit, you know, I was never the biggest John Cena fan of the world, but he always had fun with the mixed reactions that he got. And when the ECW crowd in 2006 was ready to riot and murder him, like, he had fun with it. And he made it work and made the match better. And that's what a performer should do. You can't be upset when the crowd's not reacting the way you want them to. You got to kind of listen to how they're reacting and kind of run with it. And I think Punk, knowing that the fans hated him, kind of made the match more fun. And he actually made it a lot more fun to watch and kind of ran with it. And again, the reaction that Punk got in Canada just leads me to believe, like, if the Elite doesn't see potential in a program with Punk, they are absolute fools. Absolute fools that don't understand wrestling. And these are guys that do it for a living. And I don't understand how they could let an opportunity like that slip. It should be Punk versus the Elite. That should be the main story going right now. And if the Elite are the one that are stonewalling that, they're fools. That's my take on the matter. But Punk won, as he should, and the overall match was very entertaining, I thought. The next match was the four-way for the AEW International Championship. Orange Cassidy defending against New Japan's television champion Zack Sabre Jr., ROH Pure champion Katsuyori Shibata, and Daniel Garcia, a member of the Jericho Appreciation Society. I thought the match was fine. I think it would have worked better if it was Orange versus Sabre one-on-one and Shibata versus Garcia one-on-one, or just leave off Shibata and Garcia because I'm not the biggest Daniel Garcia fan in the world, but Zack Sabre Jr., he's one of my favorite guys to watch. Like, as a worker, he's kind of like the modern-day Bret Hart for me, where it's like the things he does in the ring and the little things he does in his matches mean so much more than many of the big high spots that people do, and he's really a fantastic, technically sound wrestler, but I think that style doesn't lend itself well to four-way matches and multi-person matches. I think he works better in a one-on-one environment, and I think the idea of Zack Sabre Jr. working with an Orange Cassidy, who's so radically different from him, I think could have created a very exciting match, and I would have much rather preferred getting a one-on-one between them over just doing a random four-way, which again felt like it was supposed to be two singles matches, but they booked so many matches on this show that they ended up making this one. Again, I'm just assuming. This is how it feels to me. This was supposed to be two singles matches, and then when they realized they had too many matches on the show, they just kind of turned this one into a four-way. And I wonder, Adam Cole wasn't cleared due to illness, and his match with Tom Lawler got canceled. I wonder if it's really like they looked at this card and was like, we don't have time to put another match on here, so let's just cancel this match and move on. Maybe we'll do it on a future Dynamite or something. But I don't think anybody was that upset that match got dropped, because there were so many matches on this card that nobody missed it. But I thought the four-way was okay. Orange won, which was no surprise. They were not, as far as like title changes or anything like that, there were no like major surprises on the show, except maybe Omega and Ospreay, but I'll get into that when I talk about that. The match was okay, but I think it would have been better if it was Orange and Sabre Jr. one-on-one, but that's my take. Next up, we got a one-on-one match, which probably should have been a four-way. Sonata defending the IWGP World title against Jungle Boy Jack Perry with the most telegraphed heel turn of all time. When they did that promo where Jungle Boy was like, Hook, you're my best friend. And it was like, dude, they've been together for like 2 weeks. Like, no one, and they teamed in the past and everything, but nobody believes them as being best friends. This isn't like Macho Man and Hulk Hogan in '89 or anything like that, where there's not a huge storyline behind it or anything, or it's not like the Rockers where they teamed with each other for year after year after year. This feels like they just started teaming up, and when they did that promo, it's like, this is the most telegraphed heel turn I think I've ever seen. And sure enough, Jungle Boy loses, and then he turns heel on Hook after the match. It's like, yeah, we literally everyone and their grandmother saw that coming. It makes Hook look stupid more than it does anything else, but match itself was fine, but the heel turn was kind of the big sticking point, which credit to like making the storyline implication kind of the thing that makes this match stick out so much. But it was a heel turn that I saw coming a mile away, and the match itself, I had no way in hell Jungle Boy was winning this match, so it kind of played out exactly how I expected it to, but it is what it is. Next, we got the 10-person tag match, the Elite, Hangman Adam Page, Matt Jackson, and Nick Jackson, teaming with Eddie Kingston and Tomohiro Ishii against the Blackpool Combat Club, Jon Moxley, Wheeler Yuta, Claudio Castagnoli, teaming up with Konosuke Takeshita and Shota Umino. Shota Umino, I should say. And match was a typical Bucks match, I feel like, where it was just spot after spot after spot. One of those action-packed, well-designed in terms of how they hit all the spots and everything like that, kind of spot-festy matches. And it was exciting for that. But it's the type of match that's not going to stick with me a week later or anything like that. The Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley dynamic seemed interesting, and the crowd really reacted to that, so I wonder if they're going to reignite that feud moving forward. We'll see how that all plays out, but the overall match was fun. It was fun to watch, but again, not my favorite style of match. There's too many bodies flying all over the place, and too many people involved, and but for that type of match, I thought it worked, and it was entertaining for what it was. Next, we got the women's title match, AEW women's title match. Toni Storm defending against Willow Nightingale, who I know that she's the New Japan Strong Women's Champion or whatever, but this still feels like an AEW match, so on a card like that, like this, it kind of stuck out like a sore thumb because it doesn't feel like a crossover match. But the match was fine. Toni Storm got the win, which we all expected. Willow Nightingale seems to be getting better, which I'm happy for that, because I think her theme song is great. Like, her theme music is legit great, and you know who it is the second you hear the first note, which is what you want for a wrestler. And I think she's got potential to be like the feel-good underdog babyface that Bayley was in NXT back in the day. She's got the potential to be that equivalent for AEW. And it's like, man, if she gets better in the ring, she could be like a big star for them. And she seemed to be getting better, which is good. She had a match with Mercedes Martinez a while back that was absolutely dreadful. And that street fight it was her and Ruby Soho versus Anna Jay and Ty Conti, which is one of the most dangerous matches I think I've ever seen. Not great, but she seems to be getting better, which is good. And maybe, Mercedes Money's injury, which I wouldn't be surprised if the plan was to do Mercedes Money versus Toni Storm. That was probably the original plan, but things got canceled because of the injury. If it elevated Willow Nightingale in the eyes of AEW fans, then maybe there was kind of a blessing in disguise there, that everything played out the way it did, at least for AEW and one of their talents. It's never a good thing when somebody gets injured, but maybe they've created a new star, a budding star in the process. We'll see how it all plays out in the weeks and months with Willow, but for right now, Toni got the win. Everyone expected that. It was what it was. Match was fine. That's really all I have to say about it. And then we got the big one, the United States Championship match. Will Ospreay defeating Kenny Omega in an almost 40-minute bloodbath spectacle of a match. This match was unbelievably good, very exciting, easily the match of the night. Loved just about every minute of this. My only issue was the finish, where it is very similar to my issue with Cody and Roman at WrestleMania 40, where they did the whole spot where so-and-so the corner guy gets kicked out and injected by the referee, and yet that person still factors into the finish. And they even said on commentary that Don Callis, after he was injected, he was risking disqualification by coming back out. And I was like, unless this actually ends in a DQ, I'm calling BS on that, because nobody in AEW ever gets DQ'd. Very rarely gets DQ'd. And if they had used that rule here, I mean, it would have been a disappointing ending to a great match, but at least it would have had like some kind of consequence or something to the whole concept of the referee ejecting somebody, because right now it's becoming an overused spot that ultimately means nothing to the drama of the match. Because like I said, Solo Sikoa got ejected from the match between Cody and Roman, and then he factored into the finish anyway. So it was like, I wish he'd come up with something a little different, That's just me. Would have been nice. And same thing here. It's like, I wish he'd... Or just not eject Don Callis in the first place, and just let him factor into the finish as is. But other than that, I thought this match was amazing and brutal, and those two guys beat the ever-living crap out of each other. It was an amazing, amazing match. Stellar stuff from start to finish. Just the way they were smashing each other's head through the steel steps and the announce table and all that other stuff, complemented with a lot of the big action and the big finisher, near falls and things like that. It made for a very, very exciting match that, again, went long, 40 minutes, but I didn't feel it. It was just exciting all the way throughout. And one thing I will give Kenny, because the spot he did against Okada where he collapsed and on the Rainmaker attempt in that hour-long match they did, one of my favorite spots in the last, 20 years or so. Kenny is really good at selling like exhaustion after a long match, because that kind of came into play here as well, where he was he looked like he was fading in the closing minutes of the match, and that kind of sells the length of the match, and it sells the brutality of everything they'd done to each other up to that point. So a very exciting match, and I think it might have topped the Tokyo Dome match that they had earlier this year, which everybody said was match of the year. Excellent, excellent match. Again, except for the finish, I had a couple gripes with that. I thought this was an excellent match, and easily the best match on the show, by far. And you got a big title change out of it with Will Ospreay winning the United States title as a result. So good things all around here. And kind of sold the whole concept of the show of AEW crossing with New Japan. This match was absolutely stellar, and probably worth the price of the pay-per-view all its own, at least for me. And then after that, the rest of the show was kind of, I'm not going to say boring, but not as exciting. And you get into the six-man tag with Sting, Darby Allin, and Tetsuya Naito taking on Les Suzuki Gods, Chris Jericho, Sammy Guevara, and Minoru Suzuki. This match was bad. This was a bad match, and I don't know exactly what happened, but Sting seemed a little off. Normally when he's in these matches, he's able to protect himself and look good in the minimal spots that they give him. But here he looked off, and he was mistiming stuff, and he looked a little winded, and of course he took that 630 splash or whatever it was from Sammy, which I don't think he was supposed to. I think he was supposed to roll out of the way, but he caught it anyway, and that might have knocked the wind out of him because he looked a little out of it for the closing minutes of that match. And it also took away from the spot where he clearly got hit with the splash, but Sammy was out of the match for the rest of it, and Sting participated in the finish, so it was just kind of like, it looked bad. And there were a lot of like miscommunications, that it looked like a bunch of bodies awkwardly flying around. It was like a bad version of the 10-man tag earlier in the show, and it didn't really work. And look, I love Sting, but this one just didn't work. And there were a couple of cool spots and everything, like the Judas effect on Darby Allin's suicide dive and everything, but the overall product was not very good. And again, normally these Sting tag matches have gone really, really well and been a lot of fun. This one was not, and I don't know why that is. And you look at everybody involved, like Darby and Suzuki and Jericho and Sammy, who's at least can do some cool spots and everything, and Naito and Sting, who's a good like flavoring to sprinkle onto a match like this. It just didn't work, and this match was kind of a mess to me. I think it was the worst match on the show, personally. I don't know how everybody else thought about it, but I thought the match was kind of bad, unfortunately, because I like a lot of those guys involved, but this one didn't work. And then you had the main event, Bryan Danielson taking on Kazuchika Okada, which was nowhere near as good as Omega and Ospreay, in my opinion. It was cool that Danielson came out to Final Countdown. I thought that was neat, and I also thought the finish was shocking. I wasn't surprised that Danielson won, but I was surprised that he won by submission. That felt like a big deal that he tapped out Okada. But Danielson also got hurt in this match, which is unfortunate. But it is what it is. I thought the overall match was pretty solid, basic, technical wrestling, work rate style of match. It was perfectly fine. It was a typical Okada match in a lot of ways. And I've seen a lot of these Okada matches, and I love Okada. But this one was kind of like, it's nowhere near one of his best. It's nowhere near one of Danielson's best. It was just a pretty good match between two capable workers, and that's all it was. And I don't know. I would have closed on the U.S. title match. That's my take. I think that was a more exciting match. I think the title change made it feel bigger and would have been a better ending to the show. And, those two guys have a significant history, given the first match they had earlier this year in the Tokyo Dome. I think it would have made more sense to close with that match. But as I thought Okada and Danielson was pretty good. It was just kind of after Ospreay and Omega, it just kind of felt like, I've already seen the best that the show offers. And then, again, this match was pretty good. It wasn't a Triple H WrestleMania main event by any stretch where it was like, oh my God, please just send me home. But this one was just kind of like, yeah, it was good. It was fine. I enjoyed it. Fine. But the U.S. title match was way better. So that is AEW New Japan Forbidden Door. Overall, a pretty good show that started off hot, kind of faltered a little bit in the middle, came alive with a fantastic U.S. title match, and then kind of sputtered a little bit into the end. So, again, I think AEW needs to work on the pacing for some of these pay-per-views, but overall, it was an enjoyable show, and I don't regret watching it. So there is that. But, AEW, they've got some problems. They've got some things to work on. And with the overload of programming that they've currently got, I don't know how it's going to get better, but I'm still watching it, so we'll see how it all goes. Now, before I talk about the WWF WCW/NWA Dream Card, delaying it yet once again, I do want to talk briefly about Impact Wrestling, because like I said, I've been following it, and there have been certain developments going on that I do want to talk about. I'm not going to do full-fledged reviews of some of the recent shows they've done, like Under Siege and Against All Odds, but I will say major developments in their storylines. Alex Shelley is now the Impact World Heavyweight Champion, and I'm very happy for him because I've always liked Alex Shelley. It's like, good, he deserves, to have some breadcrumbs thrown his way for sure. A very talented guy that didn't always get the credit or the respect that he deserved, so it's nice to be, for whatever it means now, like, it's nice to finally see him getting something, but at the same time, Alex Shelley was a guy when TNA was on Spike, and we're talking like 05, 06, when he was doing the paparazzi production stuff, especially with Kevin Nash, and they were doing that whole like Nash versus the X Division thing. I thought Shelley had the potential to be TNA's equivalent to a Chris Jericho, or kind of akin to what MJF is now for AEW. I saw a lot of potential in him to be like a great character and a great mainstay for the promotion. And they just never gave him the push. I couldn't understand it. Like, they seem so hyper-obsessed. Beyond, bringing in old WWF and WCW guys to fill out the roster, they seemed hyper-obsessed with Austin Aries and giving him a push. And I was just sitting there like, yeah, but Shelley, though. Like, Shelley's probably the guy you should be going with. Because, again, he's a talker, and he's a naturally funny and entertaining guy. Go back and watch the Paparazzi production segments with Nash. Those things are hysterical. And they rejuvenated Kevin Nash's career. And he had great chemistry with Alex Shelley. I thought those segments were great. And then they added Johnny Devine to the group, and it was like, well, why is he here? Like, it should just be Shelley and Nash. But eventually Shelley settled into the Motor City Machine Guns tag team with Sabin, which ended up being one of the best tag teams in Impact. They're the two major champions right now, with Sabin winning his 9th X Division title. And that's great, and they were a great tag team, but I always felt like, man, Shelley should be a single star. And it just never panned out for him. And now he's finally the World Heavyweight Champion. It's like, okay, way too little, way too late, but okay, it's cool that they finally threw him a bone and he got something, But I was kind of starting to change my tune on Steve Maclin a little bit. I thought, oh, okay, he's just heel Josh Alexander. He's just boring wrestling man, and there's not a whole lot to him. But he was starting to win me over. That hardcore match he had with PCO was wild and insane. But, so I was a little sad to see his reign get cut short, because I was finally starting to dig the guy. And then they put the belt on Shelley to set it up for Nick Aldis to win the belt. And they did a heel turn on TV that was very well done. A much better executed heel turn than Jungle Boy on Hook. But good stuff. And I think Aldis is probably going to win the belt if I was going to predict it. And I think he probably should. I think Aldis, when he was the world champion in NWA, he carried that promotion and that belt very, very well. And those early, when they did the YouTube show, those early episodes of NWA Power, Aldis was the world champion, and he played that role to the hilt. So I'd be interesting to see what he can do in a better venue and a better setting, because I was enjoying NWA at first, and then COVID happened and sucked away all of its momentum, and it just felt like that whole promotion just didn't survive and never recovered from COVID. And now, and then when they turned around and put the belt on Trevor Murdoch, I was like, okay. And now they put it on Tyrus, and I'm like, okay. You had Nick Aldis, I'm just saying. I don't know why you made those decisions, but NWA's dead in the water at this point. I literally don't know anybody that watches it, and it's a shame, because I was enjoying it before COVID happened and destroyed everything. But, or I should say, the government's reaction to COVID destroyed everything, but that's another discussion for another time. But yeah, I'm glad to have Aldis back, and I think, okay, let's make him Impact World Champion and see what he can do. And maybe use that to springboard into WWE or AEW, where he probably should be. I mean, I think Aldis is good enough to be on a bigger stage, but again, that's just me. So that's really all the Impact talk I have. I just wanted to talk about that and say that, yeah, they've done some interesting things lately. And like I said, if they had the roster and the budget, they'd probably be putting on a better show than WWE or AEW right now, but them's the breaks. And now, finally, I can do my WWF versus WCW/NWA dream card, something that I wanted to get out in time for WrestleMania 39. Didn't happen, but, better late than never, as they say. So, a while back, I did do a dream card for WWF versus WCW post Monday Night War. So, in 2002 period, what would it have been like if the invasion never happened, everybody was available, and we got the ultimate WWF versus WCW dream card? And I did that. And that was very easy to put together for the most part, because I kind of knew what I wanted, I knew who I wanted, and I knew who I wanted to have feud with each other. So it was very easy to kind of put those puzzle pieces together, because I gave myself the freedom of, look, everyone's available, contract negotiations or any, harsh feelings on either side, all of that goes out the window, and we just do the card that we're supposed to get for the Ultimate WWF versus WCW Dream card during that Monday Night Wars period. And that was a very easy card to construct, for the most part. Very easy one. But in trying to do an 80s equivalent of that one was much harder because I was trying to pick like a specific point in time where that card could happen and how it would happen, because the rosters actually changed a lot from year to year. I recently posted on Twitter, somebody posted a clip of Barry Windham in WWF for a brief run in 1989, and it clicked in my brain. I was like, oh my god, in 1989 they had Windham, Arn, Tully, Dusty, and JJ all working for the WWF in 1989, which is bizarre, which is just crazy to think about. And, if you're doing a dream card, you got to think about it. It's like, okay, well, when can it take place? Where should it take place? Who should be, at what stage of the career should the participants be in? And various things like that. And that made it a lot harder to think through because I basically had to pick a year and just kind of go with it from there and try to figure it out. And ultimately what I decided is that I would fudge the rosters a little bit, take some creative liberties with the rosters, and set this dream card, this fantasy situation between WWF and NWA recently turning into WCW in 1989. And the reason I settled on 1989 really is because ultimately the main event's going to be Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, the Battle of the World Champions. And I think arguably 1989 was the best year for both men's careers, arguably. When you look at Flair, what he was doing, the trilogy with Steamboat and the feud with Terry Funk, he was doing excellent stuff in 89. That was arguably the best year of Flair's career. And Hogan achieved great success in 89 with WrestleMania 5 being a huge hit, the feud with Bossman and their series of cage matches that were very well received. The situation with Zeus, which I loved, and led to a wild and very successful SummerSlam main event. And there was obviously the debut of his big film, No Holds Barred, which, react to that any way you wish. I personally love the film. I love the film because it's cheesy and bad. But in any case, it felt like 89 would have been the year to do a Hogan versus Flair showdown because that's when both guys were kind of at their peak. And you were at peak formulaic, and I mean that in a positive way, peak the superhero Hulk Hogan that you think of when you think of Hulk Hogan. The best version of that was 1989, because as I've said in previous videos, prior to kind of that late 80s period, when Hulkamania was first starting, 84, 85, 86, that run, Hogan's matches were not quite the formula, the Hogan formula that you would come to expect. They were more rough and ready, blood sport, kind of had a bit of more of an NWA flavor to them when you watch his matches with Iron Sheik. Not just the title win, but their other matches, which were kind of bloodbaths. His matches with Dr. D, his matches with Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, which were total stiff fests, and things like that. It wasn't all just superhero spectacle with Hogan. There was still a bit of more of a grounded blood and guts wrestling style to his approach. Here in 89, he's full on superhero, the Hulk Hogan that we all think of when we think of Hulk Hogan, and kind of the best version of that. And Ric Flair was Ric Flair, and again, best point of his career. So that's ultimately why I decided, okay, let's do 1989. I'm going to have to fudge the rosters a little bit to make this work, but I'll do my best. And we'll just use that as the starting point to create this fantasy card. And I'm thinking maybe it would take place later in the year for 1989, after the Steamboat Flair trilogy, before Flair turned face, maybe in that October Survivor Series, close to Starrcade kind of range, somewhere around there. Not replace those shows, obviously, but kind of as another big special attraction event between both companies, happening during the fall and into the winter, somewhere around that time. And as I was putting the shows together, I ultimately decided that there should be 2 dream cards. So I split it into 2 separate events. And ultimately what inspired this, not so much having like a night 1, night 2 like I did for the WWF WCW Monday Night Wars card, or like the modern WrestleManias have been, it's more like, I remember back when I was a kid, you would see things like, oh, SummerSlam would be upcoming, and then there'd be a TV special called the SummerSlam Sizzler. It's kind of like a preview for SummerSlam. And they used to do those things quite a bit. There'd be like a little TV special to be almost like an infomercial for the upcoming pay-per-view. And again, this is before Raw, before SmackDown, before we had major competitive matches on TV every week. So these type of things still felt kind of special and kind of whet your appetite for the upcoming pay-per-view events. And I also thought, the other idea that led to me doing this is that, WWF had Saturday Night's Main Event, which is one of my favorite shows they ever did. And WCW NWA had Clash of the Champions, which is almost like the counter to Saturday Night's Main Event. So what if we did like something in the spirit of one of those pay-per-view preview events that they used to do, and do it with the branding of Saturday Night's Main Event and Clash of Champions? They can even call it like the Saturday Night's Main Event, the Clash of the Champions edition, or something along those lines. I couldn't settle on a name for it, but it was something along those lines, using the branding of both events for a co-produced co-branded event between the two companies, and get a few extra matches on there to kind of spice things up while also setting the stage for the much bigger crossover show that they would ultimately do. So going over this first kind of preview show, the Saturday Night's Main Event Clash of Champions event, I have a couple of matches lined up. One, there is a tag team match, Flying Brian Pillman and the Z-Man Tom Zink taking on Strikeforce in a cross promotional tag match where you had Flying Brian and Tom Zink, who were like the athletic, fresh-faced babyface guys. Hard to imagine Brian Pillman as a fresh-faced babyface, but earlier in his career he was. Taking on the former partners of Strikeforce, forced together in this match as part of the cross-promotional rivalry. So it was Tito Santana and Rick Martel, who split from each other at WrestleMania 5, with Martel going heel and becoming the model, but they're forced together for this particular match as a part of company loyalty to put on this athletic contest and let these two athletic tag teams work with each other. Ultimately, how I see this match going down is that Strikeforce would obviously have a breakdown in communication caused by Rick Martel's ego and his unwillingness to work with Santana, causing another breakdown that would lead to yet another Strikeforce split. Pillman and Z-Man would get the win, and Tom Zink is actually a former tag team partner of Rick Martel's as well. And they could even play off that a little bit. It's like, yeah, I had a falling out with that guy too, even though they didn't necessarily play it off that way on TV. They could have had him say, yeah, he was a jerk back when I tagged with him. So it's like, I don't know what Tito's thinking. And post-match, Martel would attack Santana and beat him down even more, which would lead to the Z-Man making the save, creating a potential duo heading into the bigger show, which I'll elaborate on. But this is an excuse to get some guys on the card, have a nice athletic match between four very talented individuals, and create another match for the bigger show, which I'll elaborate on when I talk about that card. Next up, I've got Jake the Snake Roberts versus Arn Anderson in a Battle of the DDTs match. Now, Arn Anderson was with WWF in '89, but for the sake of this particular card, let's say the Brainbusters joined the WWF, and then once the NWA cross-promotional thing happened, they stabbed WWF in the back, stabbed Bobby Heenan in the back, and just went with the NWA and just kind of go that route with it. And I'd have to fudge around because they were the tag team champions at one point, so I have to kind of fudge around with that a little bit. But the reason I'm creating this match is because Arn Anderson, who is my favorite of the Four Horsemen, love his style, love the way he works. I love his tough man personality. He wasn't as flamboyant as Flair, but I think as far as his matches goes, he was the more enjoyable one to watch, at least for me. And Jake is one of my favorite characters from the 1980s, so putting this match together is a natural to me, especially since both of them used the DDT. Jake made it his finisher. Arn would do it as kind of a finisher as well. He was more known for his spine buster, but he would do the DDT as well. And this is a match for, like, okay, battle of the DDTs. Who's got the better DDT? Jake would obviously win this match because, to me, he will always be the king of the DDT. But this would be a fun match to do between two guys that I'm very, very high on. And two guys I was a big fan of as a kid. So this would be a fun one for me. Next up, I'm going to do the Ultimate Flag match. Hacksaw Jim Duggan taking on Nikita Koloff, who was a babyface at this point, but the US versus USSR thing still hadn't completely resolved itself. And I think you could do something with these two, because Duggan was known for taking on the Russians, whether it be Boris Zhukov or Nikolai Volkov. It's like, oh, let's have him go up against the ultimate Russian in Nikita Koloff, and let that match take place. I would have Koloff win, because I think Koloff had more of an upside to him at that point. But Duggan could... the way they would probably do it is have Duggan lose by DQ by hitting him with the 2x4, because Duggan's not the brightest bulb in the shelf. But have some fun with it, and Duggan was perfect for these type of matches anyway. So do a match like that. Again, it's the ultimate flag match. It's Duggan versus Koloff. So let's just do that match here and have some fun with it on this smaller show before we lead into the bigger one. Next up is a preview match for the larger show. I do plan on doing, for the larger show, one of the matches I had set up was Hart Foundation versus the Steiner Brothers, probably my two favorite tag teams of all time. So doing that match was very exciting to me, and I think a good match for a preview event leading into the larger crossover show is Bret the Hitman Hart, the greater athlete of the Hart Foundation, taking on the greater athlete of the Steiner Brothers, Scott Steiner. And people forget, I think when people think of Scott Steiner, they think of the big bad booty daddy and what he was in WCW and TNA and that bad year he had in WWF, but people forget, it's like, dude, like, young Scott Steiner was like like Kurt Angle. Almost like a 2003 level Kurt Angle and the things he could do and how athletic he was. So I think the idea of putting Bret and Scott together in a singles match would be an excellent one to have for a show like this. I would have this match end in a draw to further build into the who's the better tag team. You got to find out at the crossover event. Let it end with some kind of a double disqualification that maybe involves the two partners, but let them have a nice, exciting, athletic match in the process to kind of, again, whet our appetites heading into the much larger show and setting up the bigger match. And kind of the main event match of this particular show would be the greatest rematch of the 1980s. Macho King Randy Savage taking on Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, a rematch from WrestleMania 3, considered by many to be the best match of the 1980s. So let's just go ahead and do that rematch with the cross-promotional banner kind of leading to these two rivals clashing once again. And I think it would be an excellent, excellent match because, again, you've seen what Savage and Steamboat can do. They worked great together. No reason to think they wouldn't be able to do that here as well. I would have Randy Savage go over because kind of as a returning of the favor because he put Steamboat over at WrestleMania 3. So let's have Savage go over here. And let this be the big main event for the smaller card because it's a match we've already seen before, but one that has some history behind it. And doing a rematch is worth it. And I've got other matches planned for the two of them at the bigger card. So let's just do this rematch and let them tear their house down on this TV special. And again, whet everybody's appetite for more cross-promotional matches heading into the bigger card. And finally, the main attraction of this card would be not a match, but a Piper's Pit segment involving Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, the two world champions, the two opponents at the upcoming major WWF versus NWA/WCW card. And let them have their jaw-jacking, let them have their verbal barbs thrown at each other, and let's get one more big stare down before the big event. And I think throwing Piper into the mix would make it more exciting. Piper's Pit was always the stage for big events and big things happening. The biggest example would being WrestleMania 3 and setting up the title match between Andre and Hogan, one of the best segments in company history. And I have that same logic in line where Piper has a history with Flair and he has a history with Hogan, so let him be kind of the moderator between these two larger-than-life world champions to, again, whet some appetites and set the stage for the much larger event, maybe, a week or two later, depending on where I set this Saturday night's Clash of Champions type of thing. Okay, now let's dive into it. The real attraction, the big crossover card between WWF and WCW/NWA, 1989. What would this event be called? I thought about making it one of the major pay-per-views like WrestleMania or Starrcade, but then I said, nah, it should be its own thing. Forbidden Door wasn't a term yet. So what would the name of this event be? I couldn't come up with anything creative, so I just used a generic term like Superstars Collide or Worlds Collide or something like that. WWF versus WCW Worlds Collide, something like that. I couldn't come up with a really, really good name for it, but let's dive into the main card. I have 14 matches, which might seem like overkill, but a lot of the WWF shows back then used to have a lot of matches, varying lengths. Like, they used to have a lot of short matches among those 14, but, you know, make it a 4-hour event. You could fit 14 matches on there, right? You know, as long as none of them go too long, it should be okay. But there were a lot of guys I wanted to get on this card, because, again, it is a dream card, it is fantasy booking, and I wanted to get in all the people that I wanted to include. So let's start off with the opening match, a battle between two legends who are no longer with us, but who, if put together, could have a very nice athletic contest to kick off the show. Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig versus Flying Brian Pillman. I've said before that Flying Brian Pillman, you know, if you had the character of 97 Pillman and the physical attributes of late 80s, early 90s Brian Pillman, you'd have a WrestleMania main eventer, because that guy was amazing. But here, he was kind of just like the high-flying underdog babyface working with the much larger talents. And Mr. Perfect is Mr. Perfect. His, you know, Curt Hennig's legacy speaks for itself. One of the greatest workers of all time. One of the best bumpers of all time. One of the greatest Intercontinental Champions of all time. Mr. Perfect's one of my favorites. So, putting these two together, I think could have a very nice, exciting match to kick off the show. And I'm going to have Mr. Perfect go over to maintain his undefeated streak and also maintain his undefeated streak and also further set him up to become Intercontinental Champion in 1990. So let's do that. Next match is the tag team match that I already kind of foreshadowed with the previous card. This one isn't going to be straight up WWF versus WCW/NWA. This is going to be a wild card scenario where you have one WWF guy and one NWA guy going up against one WWF guy and one NWA guy. Although the heel faction involves two WWF guys, technically, since Barry Windham was with the WWF in 1989, but I'm kind of ignoring that for the stream card. So, because of what happened on the Saturday Night's Main Event Clash of the Champions event and the tag match they're in, Martel and Santana have unresolved issues, so they're both getting their own tag team partners to face each other at this event. And because Tom Zenk, the Z-Man, ran in to help Santana at the end of that match, it'll be Tito Santana and Tom Zenk making up another combination, because again, Zenk is a former partner of Rick Martel's when they were the Can-Am Connection. So it's like, okay, we've had Martel and Santana, we've had Martel and Zenk, let's do Zenk and Santana, why not? And the other interpromotional team is the model Rick Martel and the pride of the Four Horsemen, one of the greatest U.S. champions of all time, Barry Windham. Again, he was with WWF at this point, but I'm kind of ignoring that for the purposes of this video. And WCW and WWF combining together to make their own separate tag teams. Because Rick Martel always defeated Santana, I don't think I ever saw Santana get a win over him. I would have the heels go over in this situation. Wow, two heels going over right in a row. But have the heels go over in this situation, what is hopefully a really fun match involving four very talented people. Next up, I'm resurrecting a dead championship, the UWF title, a title last held by Dr. Death Steve Williams before the UWF was absorbed into Jim Crockett Promotions. They defended the UWF titles for a while until ultimately discarding those belts. But Dr. Death was the last recognized UWF champion, and looking for a challenger, someone who's just as tough and just as bad as him, he agrees to put up the defunct championship against any WWF guy that he thinks could face up to him. And that brings out the challenge of Bad News Brown, one of the most underrated guys from this era of the WWF. I've talked in the past the matches that Bad News Brown had with Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan in like late 88, early 89. Matches that put Brown, or at least showed that Brown could be on the level as those top tier main eventers, because those matches were typically really good. And Bad News Brown, he's one of those guys. Dr. D is also one of these guys that I talk about, where he was like Attitude Era and Stone Cold Steve Austin before we had that guy and before we had that era. He was just, he was a trendsetter, and people didn't realize it because Bad News Brown was a very unique character where he was so angry and hated everybody so much that he even hated other heels. So when you put him on a Survivor Series team, for example, he would walk out on his partners because he hated everyone. And that's the type of personality that a Stone Cold Steve Austin had years later. It would turn it into a multi-million-dollar style of character. And Dr. D had that to some degree as well, but there was a lot of untapped potential in Bad News Brown. I know he was on kind of the back end of his career at this point. He was one of the older guys, but he was so mean and so tough looking. I always admired him, and like I said, the matches he had with Savage and Hogan really showed that he could work on that level with other guys. So when I was putting this card together, I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if Bad News Brown got a spotlight match on the show? I had it down to either Bad News Brown or Haku, given Haku's reputation as being one of the toughest guys in wrestling. But I ultimately decided with Bad News Brown because he was still relevant at this point in time, and would have been nice to see him get a spotlight match on this card. So, Dr. Death retains the title here in what I would anticipate would be a very hard-hitting brawl of a match between two guys that can work that type of style, and two guys who are, again, no longer with us, but I'm a big fan of both. Again, I love those roughneck brawler type of guys, and both of those guys just embodied that perfectly. And a match between the two I think would be very exciting, at least for me. Next up, we get a Tag Team Survivor Series match, and this match is a showcase for the tag teams. And, you know, when you think of the mid to late 80s for both companies, this was like the golden age of tag team wrestling. When you look at, and I've described it to people this way, where you look at the WWF's tag team division. They had the Hart Foundation, they had the British Bulldogs, they had Killer Bees, they had Demolition, they had, eventually they got Arn and Tully. So many great tag teams, Fabulous Rougeau Brothers, the Twin Towers, Strike Force. So many great tag teams. The Islanders were another really good one. The Dream Team at various points was a surprisingly good team. They had a lot of really good tag teams. Jim Crockett Promotions arguably had the better tag division when you look at the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, big attraction, eventually getting the Steiner Brothers, Arn and Tully, obviously. The fact that the WWF's tag division could be as good as it was, and Jim Crockett Promotions still arguably had the better tag division, really shows you, man, this was the golden age of tag team wrestling. It was just too good. There were so many great teams. So this match is kind of a love letter to that great those great golden age of tag team wrestling, and showcasing a lot of those legendary teams. So what I have here, Team WWF, the British Bulldogs, the Rockers, the Bushwhackers, and the Fabulous Rougeau Brothers taking on Team WCW/NWA, the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, and the Fabulous Freebirds. This is a mixing of enemies, because obviously, Rock and Roll Express, Midnight Express, Arn and Tully, Horsemen and Rock and Roll Express, not on the best terms with each other. And same thing with WWF. Bushwhackers and Fabulous Rougeaus were rivals, and things like that. But this is a showcase for all of these great tag teams that I couldn't really find a place for anywhere else on the card, but I still wanted to get them on here. Now, technically, the British Bulldogs were not in the WWF in 1989, so again, I'm kind of fudging here a little bit. It's like, they were brought in for a special one-off. That's what this is. They were brought in for a special one-off to do this match. And it's Survivor Series rules, done in the typical tag team style, where they would do the 20-man tag team Survivor Series matches, where if one partner gets pinned, then the whole team gets eliminated. And that it would operate under those rules, just to kind of keep the match shorter and to keep it from going too long. And but still allow for the great tag teams to show off what they could do. And I have Team WCW/NWA winning, with Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard being the sole survivors against the British Bulldogs as being the last remaining team on the WWF side. So it would come down to Brainbusters versus Bulldogs, which would be excellent, and then Arn and Tully get the win and win it for their side and their promotion. So that would be my pick there. And next up, we have kind of a filler match, more of a special attraction. Brutus the Barber Beefcake versus Kevin Sullivan, the head of the Varsity Club, and various other evil cult gimmicks throughout his long and storied wrestling career, in a hair versus hair match. This is just a way to get Brutus on the show, because people forget, we can make all the jokes we want. Conrad saying Brutus the fucking Barber Beefcake. Beefcake was mad over in '89, especially after the run with Hogan heading into SummerSlam. He was a big star, and really over at that point, and had the accident not happened, he might have gotten an Intercontinental title run at some point, and he would have been a title holder. Well, he was a title holder. He was tag team champion with Greg Valentine in WrestleMania 2, which, as I said, was a really good team. But he might have achieved greater success had that accident not happened, and it wouldn't have felt out of place, because, he was mad over. Most over gimmick he ever had. And so I was like, all right, let's just do a hair versus hair match. keep it quick, keep it simple. Barber puts Sullivan away with a sleeper hold and then cuts his hair. Easy breezy, let's just get out of there and just have a nice, fun, like, kind of filler match. Again, the type of match I think more pay-per-views, more modern pay-per-views should have. Not everything needs to be a 5-star barn burner. You can have something nice and simple and just give the people what they want. It's like, look, they just want Beefcake to cut his hair. Why extend that? Just keep it simple, keep it easy, and just have Beefcake get a quick win over Sullivan here. And nice special attraction for the card. Next up is one that I'm very excited about because it involves two of my favorites. The $1 Million Championship Open Challenge, where the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, agrees to put up the $1 Million Championship, an unsanctioned title, against any willing competitor from WCW/NWA. And the one to step up is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Both men are great wrestlers, and DiBiase is such an amazing heel that putting him up against the ultimate babyface in Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, I think would yield great results. And I can almost, it's one of those matches I can picture it in my head how it should go. Like, move for move, spot for spot, I could lay that whole match out on my own because it's so easy because their characters were so well defined and those performers were so good. I would think having a match between these two would be as easy as just about anything. It's just a natural match to do, I feel like, because again, to me, it's the ultimate heel and the ultimate face. Going up against going into a match that involves an unsanctioned title that everybody wanted to see Ted lose, because he basically just christened himself a champion, which is the ultimate heel move. And this would be another situation. It's like, oh, he might lose it this time, and wouldn't quite happen because I would have Ricky the Dragon Steamboat win this match via disqualification, and of course Ted DiBiase would put it in the contract that the title can only be won under traditional situations, like only pinfall and submission will result in a title change. So Virgil, who was still in DiBiase's corner at this point, would cause some kind of a disqualification to save the title when Ricky almost has him beat with some kind of a top rope move of some kind. So Ricky the Dragon Steamboat gets the win, but he doesn't get the $1 Million Championship. And maybe there's an appearance from Jake Roberts as well to further set up their match heading into WrestleMania 6 the next year. Next up is a big one for me, and it involves two of my all-time favorite tag teams, the face-painted duos of Demolition and the Road Warriors. Now, I've defended Demolition many times. People have accused them of being Road Warrior ripoffs. I don't think that's entirely fair. I think it completely dismisses all of Demolition's hard work and their contributions to a great tag team division that they were the head of for a few years there in the WWF. And they did a lot of great things and were one of the more consistently entertaining tag teams that the WWF had. And I think to just brush them off as Road Warrior ripoffs, I think is unfair to Barry Dorso and Bill Eadie. Completely unfair to them. And personally, I always wanted a true blue Ultimate Road Warriors versus Demolition match. Axe and Smash versus Hawk and Animal. And let's do it in a match where it's like, it's going to be violent, it's going to be brutal. And I got the idea for this match from watching the Road Warriors matches with the Russians, Nikita Koloff and Ivan Koloff, the Russian chain matches that they would do, the tag team chain matches. I'm like, okay, let's just do that here. Let's have Demolition and Road Warriors face off against each other in a double tag team chain match and just let them brutalize each other in a really violent spectacle that has more of an NWA flavor than it would a WWF flavor at the time, because they were moving away from blood and guts by this point, but this would be a taste of the classic NWA blood and guts wrestling. And this is a match, one of those matches that as a kid I would have jumped out a window to see this match if you had put Demolition and the Road Warriors together in a match like this. And they did feud in '90 when Road Warriors ultimately went to the WWF, but Axe was being phased out at that point, and most of the matches were Smash and Crush, or it was a six-man tag with the Ultimate Warrior thrown in. And I was like, nah, I wanted Axe and Smash versus Animal and Hawk. So this would be the time to do that match, I think. So it would be a very exciting match for me. I have the Road Warriors ultimately getting the win because this match is their specialty, but it would be a nice, violent, brutal match all the same. And next up I have another special attraction, the Ultimate Invitational Battle Royal, involving as many giants as I could think of. Now, you look at the graphic here, you see some of the big names that are involved in this and a lot of the big beefy guys that are involved in this Battle Royal, but I couldn't fit every participant on the graphic without making them super small to the point where you can see anything. So, I will read off the list of participants here. Andre the Giant, the king of the Battle Royals, Abdullah the Butcher, Earthquake, Tugboat, who was fresh and new to the WWF, I think at the tail end of '89. Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy making special appearances because, I think Studd had just wrapped up his latest failed run with WWF at that point, and Bundy was not there. But yeah, bring him back for a special appearance. Sid Vicious, who was a hot new big man attraction down south and doing really well. Dan Spivey, somebody who was making a name for himself in Japan at the time that you may have heard of, called Big Van Vader, one of my favorite big men of all time. And this is an excuse for me to get Vader and Andre the Giant in the same ring together, which is kind of appealing to me. A special appearance from Giant Baba, Japanese sensation, definitely worth having in a battle royal like this. Norman the Lunatic, Mike Shaw, the Junkyard Dog, Fatu Samu, Bam Bam Bigelow, the Big Boss Man, Akeem, the Warlord, the Barbarian, Ron Simmons, Butch Reed, Doom, Haku, Greg the Hammer Valentine, Rugged Ronnie Garvin, Hillbilly Jim, Hercules Hernandez, Dino Bravo, Nikita Koloff, Mike Rotunda, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, the Red Rooster, the Brooklyn Brawler, Coco Beware, Buzz Sawyer, the Dragon Master, Iron Sheik, the Honky Tonk Man, Nikolai Volkov, Boris Zukov, and the Human Wrecking Machine Zeus. Now, if my math is correct, that's 40 names into this big, beefy battle royal. So obviously Monsoon would sell it on commentary. We had to double and triple enforce the ring to hold all those massive bodies in there. And there's the right number of smaller jobber guys that could get easily tossed out at the beginning and let the Giants have their stage. And really, this is just a special attraction match, nothing more elaborate other than that. As for who wins, obviously, give the win to Andre the Giant. He was the king of the Battle Royals, and this is like one last big Battle Royal win before Andre ultimately retired the next year in 1990. He wasn't in the best health at this point, but this is an easy match to get Andre on the card without expecting him to do too much, and he would get the win. And of course, getting to see Andre interact with Abdullah the Butcher and Big Van Vader is very appealing to me, even at this stage of Andre's career. That is a very appealing thing to have. So yeah, it's the ultimate interpromotional battle royal with many names involved, and Andre gets the big win here, as he should. Now we're getting into the big matches, the final 6 matches of this card. Champion versus champion, Intercontinental Champion versus United States Champion. Ravishing Rick Rude, who, again, he lost the title at SummerSlam to Ultimate Warrior, but I'm kind of fudging it a little bit. It's like, he held on to it for a few months after that to do this match with the United States Champion, the Total Package Lex Luger. And these two guys were kind of mirror images of each other at the point where Luger was kind of like the well-built, big-time muscle guy that was a babyface and was working with Ric Flair and all that other good stuff. And Rick Rude was the heel version of that, who was this big, rough, muscle-bound, well-defined, tough guy, but was a heel. And I think it's like, all right, let's do a battle of the bots and just do champion versus champion without any titles on the line. No reason to have any title switch. I would have Lex Luger get the win with the torture rack here, but I would envision these two would have a really good match because Rick Rude, always a reliable worker, always did really well in anything they ever gave him. He's one of the few guys that did really well in WWF and WCW. He was equally good in both. Excelled in both promotions, one of the greatest U.S. champions ever, and also one of the... even though he didn't get a lengthy run with the IC title, his run was very, very good, and his feuds with Warrior and Jake Roberts speak for themselves. He's excellent worker, and deserves all the credit. So it's like, all right, heel versus face, let the face get the win, and Lex Luger wins with the torture rack. Next up is a personal dream match of mine. For the WCW Tag Team Championship, the Hart Foundation versus the Steiner Brothers, the reigning champions. I don't think the Steiners were the reigning champions quite at this point, but again, I'm kind of fudging it a little bit. And let's do a title match and have it be between the two greatest tag teams of both companies. And probably, like I said, my 2 favorite tag teams of all time, because these 2 teams embodied everything that I love about tag team wrestling. You had the big guy, the muscle-bound guy, and the athletic guy. So you have an obvious contrast there with Brett and Anvil. And then you had the Steiner brothers who could do it all. Like they were brawlers, they were wrestlers, they were do a little bit of high flying with some of the stuff that Scott could do. They both had great tag team finishers with the Heart Attack and the Steiner Bulldog. I think having these 4 guys in a match together would be an excellent, excellent tag team match, and the idea of putting these 4 guys together in such a match was very appealing to me, and one that was a no-brainer when it came to putting this card together. I would have the Steiner brothers retain the WCW tag team titles after an excellent, well-wrestled, well-fought tag team match that might even be a show stealer at this point. But moving right along from there, we get a big grudge match between the 2 psychopaths of both companies. Texas Death Match, Macho King Randy Savage versus Terry Funk. This is one of those matches nobody really ever talks about, like putting Savage and Funk together, but I don't know, something about it is very appealing to me because they are both kind of crazy, and they are both such over-the-top personalities and love to brawl and be hardcore when they have to be. So I think putting these 2 together in a no-holds-barred type of situation would yield great results because these are 2 guys that were wild and crazy and up for just about anything and could do all sorts of great stuff together. So I think this could be a really fun, very exciting match between 2 very capable legends in this business. I have Macho King going over here to keep him as a top guy in the WWF. Funk was like having like a big run with Flair at the end of the year, but would not be a mainstay in main event programs moving forward. So it would make more sense for Randy Savage to get the big win here, at least for me. Next up is an obvious one to do, the Battle of the Face Painted Warriors. WWF's Ultimate Warrior taking on WCW/NWA's Sting, the budding superstar, former tag team partners, and both guys were well on their way to being set up for World Championship gold. Warrior was on the path to facing Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6, and Sting was being set up to face Ric Flair and win the title sooner than he did. An injury had to postpone those plans, but both men were being set up for major championship wins in 1990. So let's put them together in the Battle of the Face-Painted Warriors and see what they can do together. And Sting was known for being able to work around people's limitations and make matches more exciting than they would be otherwise. So I think even with Warrior's perceived limitations, him and Sting could have had a very exciting spectacle match with each other that would have been very fun to watch, given how over-the-top these 2 personalities were and how special they were as characters. I think this one could have gone over really, really well. But since both guys were being set up to win major titles the next year, this match would end in a draw, possibly a double countout of some kind, and end in some kind of mutual respect between the 2, because neither one could afford a loss at this point. But still, doing the match I think would be a lot of fun and make for a very exciting match. And this show is going to have a double main event of sorts, kind of a big 1-2 punch to close the show on. One is a big superstar 8-man tag that I considered making a War Games match, but seemed a bit excessive on this card. It would be overkill to just have a War Games match, so we went the traditional 8-man tag instead. Although I guess if you want to use your imagination, you could pretend this is War Games, whatever. But instead of going for full-on violent spectacle, I just went on for showcasing larger-than-life characters interacting with each other. So this would be Team Roddy Piper taking on Team Dusty Rhodes, with both men's contracts, Roddy Piper's and Dusty Rhodes, up for grabs, with the losing team resulting in the team captain going to the other company. So this is my way of kind of transitioning Dusty Rhodes into WWF programming by having his team lose this match and ultimately become a star within the WWF. And my major reason for doing this match is that Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes are 2 of the most larger-than-life, charismatic personalities that wrestling has ever produced. So to me, for the promos alone, having these 2 interact with each other on television is a natural thing to do. I think it was like, you know, again, it goes beyond star ratings and things like that. It's just the idea of sticking these 2 characters together and having them put their flag in the camp of their own company, and ultimately leading to them having this big match where they all have to assemble their own teams with their own partners and go to war with each other. So on Team Rowdy Roddy Piper, I've got Piper as the team captain, Jake the Snake Roberts, big star for the WWF at that point, Superfly Jimmy Snuka, a big rival of Piper's from the past, but also a high flyer, and a very athletic type to be kind of an X factor in this whole situation. And Snuka came back to the WWF months earlier, so he was on another run at this point. And rounding out the team is kind of the anchor, the roughneck, hard-nosed hacksaw Jim Duggan, who's a colorful character but also one of the roughest brawlers around at the time. And the idea is that you'd have the over-the-top character in Piper, the psychological smart man's, thinking man's wrestler in Jake Roberts, the athletic one in Jimmy Snuka, and Duggan being the roughneck brawler. So kind of a diversity of talents and skill sets among the different partners. And I went kind of the same road with Dusty Rhodes, who, again, over-the-top character in Dusty, larger-than-life, charismatic personality, and his teammates, Cowboy Bob Orton, the rough brawling type, who is more technical, but he's he can also trade hands with the best of them. Also, he has a history with Piper, which would have facilitated bringing back some history between them and opening up some old wounds and things like that. So that could have led to some fun things. The Great Muta, who's an amazing athlete and also kind of the weird psychological one as well. He's kind of like a counter to both Jake Roberts and Jimmy Snuka in that regard. And I love Great Muta, so working him into this match is a natural for me. And another one is a guy on loan from the AWA and not really in WCW NWA at this point, but I put him in there anyway because it's the ultimate interpromotional card and I just wanted to include him. And that's Sergeant Slaughter, who's would be kind of the opposing force to Jim Duggan in this situation. So a wide variety of characters and talents and personalities, which should result in a highly entertaining and colorful match, whether it's War Games or not. And again, I decided against making it War Games because presumably NWA would have been doing War Games on their own by this point anyway, so doing another one in WWF would have just felt like overkill. So doing the traditional 8-man tag with these personalities I think would have made for a very exciting match regardless. And because Dusty ultimately ended up in the WWF, the idea here is that Piper's team would win and Dusty would end up being transitioned over to the WWF, but ideally the match would end with Piper and Dusty shaking hands and Piper agreeing to help Dusty along and maybe even team with him, which, whoa, would that have been a good tag team, Piper and Dusty. I would have paid to see that, to help transition him into being in the WWF. This is another match that would end in mutual respect between the two rivals, as it were. So, I can see very good things for this match, and it would be a very exciting one, especially for me. Has the appeal of a Survivor Series match from that era, where it's like all these different personalities mixed together, and when you work in the interpromotional element, that makes it even more exciting. So, a lot of good stuff here, and a lot of good things could come out of a match like this, but as I've already said, the main event is the Battle of the World Champions, Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Who's better, the Nature Boy or the Immortal One? The leg drop versus the figure four, the definitive main event match of the 1980s between the two companies that you could have possibly done, and a very easy, natural match to do under these circumstances. Like, the second... If in 1989 they had actually announced an interpromotional WWF versus NWA/WCW card, everyone and their grandmother would have assumed it's like, okay, so they're doing Hogan and Flair, right? That's where this is going. So this would be the star attraction of the show, the big main event match. And, I'm being perfectly honest here. I've never been a huge fan of the Hogan-Flair matches. They just never really, with few exceptions, they never really clicked with me. I think their best match is the Bash at the Beach '94 is probably their best, and I enjoyed the Clash of the Champions match that they had a few months later when they did the whole like Hogan got attacked Nancy Kerrigan style, and they did that whole angle. But I thought that match was entertaining. But generally speaking, I'm not really a huge fan of their matches. But in 1989, when both guys were arguably at their best, probably would have yielded much better results. And that's one of the things I've always said to the people who say, "Oh, they should have done Hogan Flair at Mania 8," and there are a few reasons why that couldn't happen. Hogan was leaving. They wanted to get the title off Flair. They had to get the title off Flair because they, back in those days, they can't have a heel walk out of Mania with the champion. So they felt like they were kind of stuck in that way. And, there's talks that the house show matches they didn't draw and things like that. But one of my reasons for not doing the match at Mania 8 was like, I don't know, I feel like they'd already missed the opportunity. It was 92 at that point, and it just felt like Hogan was on a downturn. Flair wasn't quite what he was in 89. Still very good, but wasn't quite what he was in 89. And it's like, to me, the perfect time to do this match would have been 88, 89, when both guys were, peak versions of themselves. That would have been the time to do it. And hopefully it would have resulted in a more exciting match. And it's fun to think about what could have been. But this would have been the time to do a Hogan-Flair match, Battle of the World Champions. I guess it would have been face versus face at this point because Flair hadn't turned heel and turned against Sting yet. But maybe I would have hastened that up a bit, do the feud with Funk and then quickly turn Flair heel again, have him betray Sting and all that other stuff, do it earlier, and just to do the match with Hogan and see what would go down here. I have Hogan going over because Hogan always goes over. Hogan must pose. As it were. So I put Hogan down as going over, but I guess in this type of match it doesn't really matter. It's just the idea of getting both guys together and creating an excellent main event for this ultimate dream card. So that is my 1989 version of a WWF/WCW/NWA dream card. Like what that would look like if I had full control over everything and I got to kind of move the chess pieces around a little bit and fudge with the rosters a little bit. This is what the dream card would have looked like for me. Something akin to this, at least. Very close to this. And I think it would have made for a very exciting card. Now, I might do this again with other years. Like, I wonder what a WWF JCP card would have looked like in 1986. What would that have looked like? How cool would that have been? And have some fun with that. So there's still creative potential in doing more fantasy cards from this era of wrestling. One of the most exciting times to be a wrestling fan. And I wouldn't mind revisiting it. But that is all I have for you now. I think I have rambled on long enough. I think we're all done here. So like I said, this is going to be the last you see of me for a while. The next time you see me, I will be a father. God willing, everything goes okay. I will be a dad, but I'm still going to be getting content out for you. And check me out on Twitter. The link is in the description, and you'll get updates on various things, my opinions on things, and of course updates on the upcoming book that I'm currently working on and is nearing its publication date. We're at the very tail end of getting that book ready for publication, so I'm very excited about that. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you all later.